Okay, we are live. So today on the Teflon Tales, I have Syya Yasotornrat. Welcome, Syya.
Hello, hello.
And we've known each other for it's been 2 weeks, but
A
feels like
solid 2 weeks, and it has been fun. You got
yeah,
to have a little bit of a earth shattering power outage. No water, no heat. To really bond with people.
I know, and it's been and for some people, I think it's been harder than others. But I think one of the things that we'll talk about that in a bit, right? But I want to kind of start this off and then hand over the mic to you, right? Which is you follow the traditional path of high tech sales to podcaster, content producer, storyteller. That's like the normal path, right? so,
Absolutely standard, right?
so talk about that light bulb moment or moments where you decided, okay, high tech sales, you can take a pause, turn down that stove, and start something brand new, aka podcasting at that time. So in hindsight, it might seem obvious, but again, for the viewers and listeners out there, this is like, why did you make that leap? What did you get? Like, what indications did you get? And what are some of the learnings?
Are we going to be brutally honest here? Or do you want
Yes, absolutely.
you want brutal honesty, or do you just want I can give you if I'm wanting to interview again and work for corporate America, I guess I can give you that answer too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, knock on wood, I have to say 20 plus years in tech corporate sales. I have nothing but fond memories as well as nightmares that actually I still dream about today, right? And I think that's a good and bad as you have a 20 plus odd career, right? It's not always going to be roses. But I saw the writing on the wall at my company that I left back in 2017. I think you have to be brutally honest with yourself is what are your priorities in life? When I went in to sales, initially I liked it because I felt like I was making an impact. I was in my 20s, and I had that fire in the belly to be a powerful, sales executive. But quite frankly, fast forward over time, my priorities changed. And I'm not saying that it was bad. I'm just saying my priorities shifted where I actually wanted work-life balance. And when you're breaking out into hives, every time you have your weekly forecast call, probably assign to yourself that maybe you need to take better care of who you are and what you are versus collecting a great paycheck and income. So what happened? My position got eliminated. And I had the option to look around within the organization. And honestly, I thought to myself, I think I'd rather, put a pitchfork in my eyeballs than to look for another job in the company. And so I left. I left and I took a year and a half off, traveled around the world, went to Greece, went to Thailand, went to Europe and did a little bit of a genealogy jaunt, which was really cool. Went to Alaska, Turks and Caicos, and then realized, as you know this, Ashwin, you kind of get accustomed to a lifestyle as being in tech and realized I have champagne taste with zero budget. And I had to do something. So my partner and I, we were talking over a glass of wine, actually, about why don't we just, do a podcast around technology innovation so we can keep our pulse on the industry while I was still trying to find my soul. And that's what kicked it off. Launched a very successful podcast and called Innovation Calling, and discovered very quickly you can't have CIOs coming to the closet in your house. So we looked for a podcast studio. And we opted to partner up with a co-working space, City Central. So shout out to City Central. And we now run all the City Central podcast studios. So not only we launched a podcast, we launched a podcast studio. And then that pushed it into Innovation Media Enterprises, where we now provide the easy button for businesses looking to execute on their own podcast strategy. Long-winded story, but you asked for it, Ashwin.
So one of the hardest things, and this is what I push my guests on the Teflon Tales, right, which is you're really good at something, right? And yes, position got eliminated. I've got eliminated a couple of times in my career as well, right? It is a light bulb moment, but if you have the skills and if that's the kind of the only treadmill you've been on, the next immediate thing is you reach out to a bunch of your cohorts, networks, and ham in the market, and you start floating your resume and the usual stuff, right?
Right.
And what you did, and again, this mirrors my journey, so there's a strong parallel over here, is to actually get off the treadmill and look at what drives you, what again, this obviously you remember this wine glass moment where you said, hey, let's try this out, right? But being successful at something and then starting something brand new, you'll probably suck at it. I know I sucked at podcast when I first started, right? And to be able to kind of deal with the dissonance, right? And that's why I've seen lots of people frequently go back to their kind of tried and trusted because they're good at that. How did you deal with that inner critic? How do you deal with like, hey, like, Syya, what are you doing? It's like podcasting. It's like, hey, you're an amazing sales woman, right? So outside critics, inside critic, and how do you deal with that?
I think you'll always get outside critics. I think all of my circle of friends were like, what the heck are you thinking? And like, I mean, legitimately, and I think it was well-intentioned. I absolutely do think it's well-intentioned, but there are people thought I lost my rocker, but I've been talking for years about leaving the rat race, if you will, of tech sales. I was kind of over it, to be brutally honest, right? With my friends, some of them were more supportive than others. And again, as a female in tech, particularly sales, which is highly competitive, nothing inspires me more than being told I can't do something. Mm-hmm. So if you want, like, maybe it's ego, I don't know what it is, but it inspires me to work harder to prove myself right and them wrong, right? So that's one outside external motivation. Internally, however, of course, you're going to question yourself. Of course, you're going to be saying, wow, I just sunk X amount of dollars into a business that I know nothing about. I've never run a business in my life. I could barely do expenses when I was in sales. Who knows how I'm going to do my own like accounting, right? But you do learn it over time. And like training wheels on a bike, you're going to fall on your face a lot. And you're going to do some work that maybe you're not the most proudest of. But if you don't evolve, that's when I think you might be stuck or you might be challenged. But yeah, no, I still suck. What are you talking about?
but that, you mentioned something which I think is so important, right? For people to realize is you won't get better at something unless you keep trying, and you will fail. There'll be some spectacular successes. There'll be some colossal failures. But again, you mentioned a network, right? A small network of folks who are non-judgmental. And sometimes, again, being in tech, it's like you said, it's highly competitive, whether it's sales or outside sales, right? And people look at you through one lens. And now you're doing something different. So how did you kind of go about getting that cohort, which is non-judgmental, which is not really in tech, which kind of understands where Syya is going and is giving you support?
Yeah, well, honestly, I have... to be brutal honest, I still have friends today wondering when I am going to go back to corporate. So part of me feels like, well, are you asking me? You're wanting me to fail? Like, what's going on here? I think people do have their genuine best interest in you to succeed. They really do. Podcasting is a new industry, not new industry, but how prevalent it is now in social media, especially with the pandemic. Everyone seems to have a podcast now, right? But the question is how are you doing it and leveraging it to monetize? I do want to clarify, we do produce for businesses. So if you are a business that specializes in consulting clients for underwater basket weaving, and that's your podcast topic, by all means, we'll support you on it. But we don't necessarily focus on hobbyists, right? Mm-hmm. So we do want to clarify a little bit on that, because we are trying to bring, particularly tech companies, an understanding that the messaging of podcasting is not an ad. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm kind of being a little convoluted here, but it's where, again, that circle of friends, I'll be honest with you, it was a very small circle of friends that supported me on this decision. I mean, many now still can't figure out how I make money, which makes me like scream at times, because it's like they pay me to produce their podcast. I don't know how else to describe it.
But. Yeah, so going on that same thing, right, which is I can almost guess the answer over here, because like I said, I've been through that myself, but I want to hear it from you so that the viewers can get that value out of it as well, right? Which is, you're probably operating at an RPM that from a innovation, learning, pivoting perspective that you probably never had to, even in a 20 plus year sales career, right? And it's not that you don't adapt at work, but the pace of adaptation, especially now with COVID and everything else, like you're saying, is rapid. So did you already have that DNA, that mindset of, okay, I'm getting data over here, how do I internalize that? Has my target market changed? Have I need to change the length of the podcast? How post-production? So how did that journey evolve?
Right. So I don't think of anyone can accuse me of being a wallflower, first off. So there is a component of being that DNA component, right? Where like I'm always like fired up. People ask me all the time, like, is it really a good idea of you to drink that cup of coffee? Because you probably don't need any more, right? Um, so yeah, I do think to some degree there's some of your internal fire, that drive that's within you. Um, Part of that is I love to learn. I've always loved to learn. So even when I was in sales, though I wasn't the technical person, I was really interested in learning the technology. So at least though I could understand it conceptually, I mean, heaven knows if you had me configure a router and I did it, you have bigger problems in your organization, right? But for me to understand conceptually where, how a data center would fit, right? Or how they can look at cloud and all that good stuff, right? Um, that I just apply that same desire, maybe that same I love playing puzzle games, to learn how to do that with podcasting. And so there was a lot of steep, learning curve. I am not a podcast editor,
Mhm.
but I know how to edit for audio and video. So, could I do it? Sure. Am I at professional grade quality? I wouldn't necessarily say that at all, but I'm enjoying the ride to learn. And that's what I think all entrepreneurs and all successful business leaders have, that same commonality, is that drive to learn, keep learning.
Yeah, and you mentioned something when you took a year and a half off, and even now you were kind of looking back and saying, okay, what are your values? What drives you? And also, I think one of the challenges in tech life in general is the pace at which you got to keep going, right? And especially now, I was talking to somebody today, it's like, hey, breakfast starts at 8 and they continues working till dinner, and you have no commute time, right? So the expectations keep going up, and the ability to cool down, and we don't talk about this often enough, right? How do you turn off the stove and say, okay, I'm actually cooling down quickly so that I can actually get heated up again tomorrow? How does that play into your life?
I would say normally jokingly, but not so jokingly, don't underestimate the power of grape, right? Like that glass of wine really does help me just take things down a little bit of a notch. But no, but I think the pandemic actually has taught me, and actually that year and a half that I was traveling was literally just look outside your window and just stop to smell the roses, if you will. Like, I cannot tell you how much that's been helpful for me. And I mean, you could call it meditation, if you will, but having that moment to just look and just look at the scenery, right? For us, when we bought our house, it was, I wanted the illusion of a big backyard, but I didn't want to maintain any of it. So we ended up buying a house on a golf course. Okay. So I got the illusion of a manicured lawn without having to do
Yeah.
anything about it. But I forgot that's why I bought the house. And I hadn't even looked at my backyard other than to clean the poop out of my dogs, in the backyard. But it was such a gratifying feeling to say, look, life is going on. I had to change my mentality and my identity, right? As working for a corporate technology company in sales to, who is Syya? What is Syya about? And I think that's something that like you had mentioned, is the pandemic really taught, I think, us as a culture and society who we are. It slowed us down, which I think is awesome.
So I want to call out a common friend. I think the name looks familiar. It's
Oh,
like
crazy girl. Syya.
thanks, Leah. It's the reason you're because of you is how Sia and I connected. And yeah, thanks for the shout out.
For
Um,
sure.
so the again going back to that piece of saying, hey, what's the and you mentioned something that I think we frequently forget, right? Like, hey, you bought this house, you didn't want to maintain it, and you had this fantastic view, and you forgot there was a view, right? And sometimes we get caught up in that. So talk a little about, again, the constant experimentation comes at a cost, right? And for you, what have you been willing to give up in order to do what you're doing right now?
Well, it's funny. I feel like I haven't really given up a lot, actually. I actually feel like because I've prioritized things that are important to me, maybe the things that were on my priority list have been adjusted, but I don't feel like I have lost anything. My friendships, I've maintained a lot of people that I'm like hold dear to my heart that I've reached out to. Business relationships that, were meaningful business relationships where it was a true partnership and collaboration versus a, customer vendor relationship. to me, I haven't really sacrificed any. Are those relationship conversations changing or have they evolved? Absolutely, they have. So I don't really feel like I've lost much. In fact, I think I've gained more because I've gained more insight, perspective. We joined my partner, Aaron Greger, and I. We are the Dallas chairs of Global Leaders Organization, for example, which is a organization focused on the entrepreneurs and established startups. I was never part of that entrepreneur community before, and I've gained because I've decided to branch out and flap my wings, if you will. So I don't know, I love opportunity and I love change because it means you just win. To me, you don't lose anything with change.
Yeah. So again, looking at what you've done, again, there's obviously the podcasting piece, which is core and center. But you mentioned something about the entrepreneur focus inside of Dallas. Again, I look at your posts. You're very, very active on LinkedIn, and here we are conversing. So another attribute of Teflon is like, hey, you got to keep doing stuff because you don't know whether your core business is going to disappear tomorrow, right? And we're looking at, I was reading the Wall Street Journal today, there's Home Depot, there's Macy's, right? Mm-hmm. Two extremely successful businesses. Home Depot has gone up 25% in revenue and Macy's is plummeting, right? And for no fault of theirs. I mean, the pandemic hit and there are some winners and losers. So part of this culture that we have, which is, hey, you're good at something, you keep doing it and be competitive and all that, versus saying, hey, what if the job goes away? What if the market disappears? So again, any tips on how you can reinvent yourself while your current gig is actually doing well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said before, I'm a huge believer in opportunity. Change brings opportunity. And so when we launched our business initially, like I said, I'd mentioned we were looking for studio space for our podcast. Mm-hmm. And then as we looked at studio spaces we liked and didn't like a lot of things, we entered into a partnership with a co-working space. And then we got into the podcast studio business. We saw that opportunity saying, well, hey, as opposed to just having a studio, why don't we rent it out and make money and offset the costs, right? I cannot express this more. The pandemic taught a lot of people, not just me, you have to pivot. You have to look for that other opportunity. I was actually talking to Dr. Angel Durr here in Dallas. I want to give her a shout out with Data Ready DFW, former guest on Innovation Calling. She's a data scientist, PhD, and her nonprofit helps people change their careers and look at data science as a new career path. And her story was so riveting to me that really inspired and carried me through the pandemic of, okay, we originally were only doing audio-based podcasts. We weren't doing video. Well, now everyone wants video. So now we have picked up resources to do the video component and editing. You can't assume the way you go into business or how you start out your career is going to be the way it's going to happen. I mean, Ashwin, you're probably more responsible than me, but are you in the same field as your degree that you got?
Not even close.
And that's what's funny, right? It's like you have to tell the Gen Zs the degree that you're working towards may or may not even be relevant or what you want to do with your life, but is at the end of your life. No, you're going to pivot and figure things out. Same thing applies to now.
And you mentioned something that is so obvious in hindsight, but again, you kind of look at it and say, hey, when the pandemic first hit, it's like, hey, I'm a physical event organizer. I'm now hosting virtual events. It's not the same thing. So sometimes there's a lot of unlearning involved and relearning, right? So where do you, again, from a viewer's perspective, right? How do you give yourself that humility to say, okay, whatever I've learned is good, but I have to understand that maybe the world has changed and start relearning stuff again. So what, any attributes of how they could imbibe those skills?
I think you have to be open-minded, first off. Mm-hmm. I think you have to, excuse me, I think you have to accept that your value systems or what you hold dear or things that you're looking at may have to be reevaluated over the course of time. Now, I'm not saying change who you are as an individual. Mm-hmm. I think that's your basis. That's your baseline and pedestal of your core value systems. But as you kind of go up a little bit away from that, again, that base and priority, then you have to be a little bit more flexible and embracing that change or opportunity. Or, I say with my friends all the time, when we're not talking about politics at all, is the fact that, what, there might be a concept or idea that you may agree or not, agree or disagree with, but you're at least understanding where the perspective comes from. Right. And so I guess I mean, Ashwin, how are you as far as like, when you and I first talked, were like gabbing like crazy and going all over the place, right? We weren't expecting that in our initial,
Yeah.
conversation, right?
Very true. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think so I want to give a quick shout out to my first ever Teflon Tales guest, Miles Biggs. And
Hey,
this was
Miles.
thanks, Miles, for being here. And again, it's so reflective because Miles and I still remember this so vividly in my mind, right? Because I had applied for LinkedIn Live, I don't know, sometime in 2019, right? And they kept saying, "Oh, we'll evaluate," and then I think it was around June of last year that I finally got, "Hey, Teflon Tales, hey, just you're not Teflon Tales, LinkedIn Live, you're ready to go, right?"
Right.
And then I said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it," but then I hit pause because I had no idea what I was going to do with LinkedIn Live, right? Because there's so many great LinkedIn Live hosts already. So, and so it was a seminal moment for me because I've been waiting for it for a year, and I've got it now, and I don't know what to do with it, right? And I still remember my conversation with Miles at that point because I posted this short video about Teflon, a small video, right? And Miles and I hadn't even connected on LinkedIn, but he responded to it, and I said, "Hey, maybe this is resonating with a few folks." So then I reached out to Miles and said, "Hey, you want to join this Teflon Tales? I just made this up, right?" And except for I think it was Thanksgiving, one other midweek that I missed. This is being continuous, right? So I didn't even know I was going to do this, right? So some of it is just evolution. So one last question, right, is you had that moment where you got you were asked to leave and the organization let you go, and you had that moment of saying, okay, I need to hit pause now. For somebody who is on the treadmill and they have obligations, they have their self-worth they're worried about, and they don't get that, I call it an opportunity, right? I mean, I was afforded that opportunity twice in my career. You've been offered it once, where somebody tells you, stop, right? And if they don't get that, how do you, I mean, any tips on how they can continue to be what they're doing? And people talk about side hustles and side gigs and all that. I mean, but what's that first step that he or she needs to do while they still have a job? And God forbid they don't get laid off, but they still have that feeling of discomfort and uneasiness and unfulfilled life.
Right. So I'm a huge, huge fan of history. Okay. I got a degree in history, doing nothing with it other than spouting off trivia every now and then. But, who was it that said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself? I think it's Winston Churchill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what it is. You have to just try. Just try whatever it is that makes you happy in life. Try it once. And you know what? The odds are high you're going to fail, right? But sometimes if you keep trying something, eventually you're just going to find something that either works for you or you're going to get better at it. Either way. I say this to all of our podcast clients, okay? You don't have to have the Joe Rogan podcast, right? None of us are going to be getting $100 million contract yet. Ashwin, you and me, yet. But there's a lock for every key.
Yeah.
And I say this, I'm big on quotes. I didn't realize I was a quoter person, but everyone has a story to tell. And I think that's why podcasting and this type of conversation is so critical, because now that you and I can't touch, or I know it sounds really naughty when I say this, we can't physically be in a room together as much, right? With, again, being with social distance, how else are we connecting as humans, right? And it boils down to conversations, who we are. Teflon Tales, I love it because it shares who you are as Ashwin, as you're asking us questions. And it also shares who I am. I'm not just a former tech sales. I'm not just a podcast strategist and, consultant. I'm Syya, and, I really like grape soda. I mean, okay, it's called champagne, but leave me alone. Okay. No, but you know what I mean? It's like there's so much more to us as humans, and that that connection, we have to find ways to do it. And that's why I encourage everyone, like you said, you finally got LinkedIn Live. What are you gonna do about it? To me, try things out. Who's gonna criticize you but yourself?
Yeah.
So do it, everyone. Try it.
Yeah, it's so true, right? I could keep going back to Nike. I mean, just do it. I mean, it's just 3 words, but I think it gives you that. I mean, I had a business school professor of mine says, allow yourself the discomfort. And every time I feel something, and it's so generous because you're kind of being permissive with yourself. It's not the world, it's not your family. it's yourself. But they also realize there's going to be discomfort along the way, right? So yeah, great conversation again, Syya. Thanks, and looking forward to keeping up with you and your podcast and connecting.
Absolutely, Ashwin. Thank you so much for having me, and yay, Teflon tails.
Thanks you. Thank you. Bye bye.